Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know we'll have some more folks who will be trickling in, but we've got some great presenters today, and I want to honor everybody's time and get started. Welcome to this session of Resourcing for Success, a series of conversations that Campus Compact is organizing focused on supporting community and civic engagement leaders around the critical topic of fundraising and resource cultivation and all of its various forms. This is the 5th session that we have done on this topic. Here in a second, I can put in chat a link to where you can see the other recordings. If you haven't had a chance to join us yet, we have tackled everything from federal earmarks or congressionally directed spending, as it's officially called, to endowed professorships, to endowed centers and institutes, and lots of things in between. And today I am thrilled to be bringing to you a number of special guests who are doing exciting work around the question of corporate and foundation relations and sponsorships, and thinking about how we really leverage and support the cultivation and relationships with those critical partners in advancing our work. Today's session is also a little bit unique in that we're combining both sharing with you some experts and some folks who are doing this work in practice, but also hoping that some of you will stick with us through the end to have a conversation around what else is needed to support our field and our collective work in this space. To that end, I want to talk to you a little bit about our agenda today. So this session is actually on the calendar for 90 minutes. We know not all of you will be able to stay with us for the entire time, but we hope that a number of you will. How this is going to run is that we're going to spend the first 35 minutes focused on hearing from 3 campus leaders and really hearing firsthand what are they doing and how are they advancing this work on their campus. We'll then spend about 20 to 25 minutes having David Weerts, who's been working with us as a moderator throughout in many parts of this series, kind of have a conversation with our 3 speakers today, both about what they learned from each other during their presentations, but also this is an opportunity where we want folks who are here to ask questions, kind of go deeper on something that you heard that you have more questions about. And then we're gonna, at 3 o'clock or close to it, start a conversation, a quick conversation around what else is needed. And this is where we're really looking to hear from folks in the field to say, what other kind of resources are needed? What kind of support might be needed? How can we support those of us who are interested in advancing fundraising for civic and community engagement as we look towards the future? So that's what our lineup looks like today. I'm excited to introduce to you the 4 special guests that you can hopefully see on the screen. First is, and we can just give a little bit of a wave, first is David Weerts, who is a professor of higher education and the faculty director for academic planning and programs in the Office of Public Engagement at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. David also serves as director for the Engagement Academy of University Leaders. So thank you, David, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, David's going to be coming back to us in about 30 minutes or so after we hear from our campus leaders to engage them in conversation. Our campus leaders, and I'm going to introduce them in the order of which you're going to hear from them. First up is Jilo Tisdale, who is the director of the Bonner Office of Civic Engagement at Spelman College and has been with the college for 10 years. And I'm really excited to hear about their work. Next, we have Melanie Vignovich. I'm not so sure I said that correct, Melanie, on the last name pronunciation, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Corporate and Foundation Relations at the University of Pittsburgh. Melanie has been with Pitt, as is lovingly referred to, I think, within the local sphere for 15 years. And I want to say a thank you to Lena Distilio in particular at the University of Pittsburgh, who really recommended that we connect with Melanie in raising up her work. And last but very much not least is Rian Satterwhite, who is the Director of Service Learning and Leadership at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who has been with UNLV for 6 years. And also Ryan and I have had a series of conversations around the work he's doing in this space. So I'm excited to hear from all 3 of them and always interested in David's take on what's happening in this work. So with that, I am going to turn it over to hear from Spelman as our first campus.
Good afternoon.
I think everybody can. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Bobby, for that introduction. And thank you for providing this opportunity to speak with colleagues and other folks who are side by side with me in this work about what we're doing at Spelman. I'm going to share my screen. I know it seems like after we've been doing it for so long, it shouldn't feel like an adventure every time, but it does feel like an adventure every single time. Can you see my screen? Yes, great. Okay, so as Bobby said today, talking about resourcing for success, leveraging corporate and foundation dollars to support civic engagement on campuses. Let's see. Okay. So I am at Spelman College. We're located in Atlanta, Georgia. We're a small liberal arts college. We have about 2,500 students. We're also an historically Black college, an HBCU. We are part of the Atlanta University Center, which is a consortium of HBCU colleges in the Atlanta area. It includes Morehouse College, Clark Atlanta, Morris Brown, and Morehouse School of Medicine. So we are all in the same geographic footprint, which allows us to do cross-programming, cross-fertilization. It's a very unique environment to work in. Over 50% of our students at Spelman are Pell eligible, which says something about the types of issues beyond their academics that they are grappling with every day, and that we're trying to support them in navigating for success. And I put this tagline on here, choice to change the world, because it is a foundational part, not only of who Spelman is, but also of how I think the Bonner Office of Civic Engagement is positioned at Spelman. The civic engagement at Spelman, we have gateway service. The Bonner Office of Civic Engagement, where I sit as the director, manages, in addition to our Civic Scholar program, the Bonner Scholars, and other civic scholars who have made an express commitment to service and engagement while they're on campus. We also manage the college's 24-hour service requirement for graduation. And I refer to that as gateway service, right? It is not the deep level of civic engagement that we want students to leave with, but it is an opportunity for us to touch each and every one of them with some initial opportunities and some initial experiences. And so we take advantage of that by hosting civic scholar programs, by having signature programs and campus-wide events, and also offering course learning support to faculty so that there can be embedding in the academic side for service learning courses. These are students engaged in some of these entry-level service experiences that get them started, that get them thinking about the community around the campus, that get them thinking about how they can contribute to improving the community, how they can learn in the community alongside community leaders. Once we get them engaged in those entry-level activities, we really begin to push them to think about what else they need to become more proficient, right? Because now they've gone out, they worked in the Atlanta public school classroom, they've come back, they've talked about how that classroom may be different than their own learning experience, things that they would like to offer and support in the classroom. And so we get to funding. How do we fund these deeper level initiatives so we can bring in training for students so that they have more to offer and more knowledge about how to offer these things alongside community in a way that is duly beneficial, right? An opportunity for students to learn, but also an opportunity for community to be able to share their expertise and receive things they actually need, not just things that we may perceive that they need. So we have some institutional funding that supports our office. It supports a few of our positions. We have some endowment funding that supports stipends for our Bonner Scholars. And we have been able to secure some foundation funding to support some of our key programs. We also have corporate funding, right? Corporate funding from the UPS Foundation, from Barclays, from Capital One, and from American Family Insurance Foundation. And I want to talk a little bit about those particular funding streams and how we secured them, what we've been able to do with them, and how in one instance we are sustaining programming that the foundation has redirected their funding, right? So the UPS Foundation began funding scholars at Spelman 30 years ago. They started a program called UPS Scholars with 10 students at Spelman, 10 at Morehouse, 10 at Clark Atlanta. And those students were going to push in to Pickett Elementary School, which is about 20 minutes from our campus, and provide mentoring and tutoring support. And UPS was excited about this because they had a commitment as an organization for their employees to push in at FICIT and provide support, and they were donating other dollars to FICIT. And so they thought this was a great opportunity for them to support college students with a small scholarship and also bring those college students into the FICIT environment to be mentors, to model what it could look like to go to college. And so they committed to giving $5,000 scholarships to each of those 10 students. As I said, they started this 30 years ago. It was very exciting. It's been a great partnership. The tension began probably about 20 years in, as tuition went up, as gas prices went up, as everything increased, and there wasn't a corresponding increase in the amount of the scholarship. There was the same expectation of what will be put in by the college and what will be put in by the students, but no additional increase in support from UPS. So we began to have to find other funds and ways to support those scholars to maintain that support from UPS. UPS has decided that they're going to transition their funding at Spelman into an endowment that will more directly support students who are on a career path that might align with hiring at UPS. So the dollars will still come to the college, but they won't come to support civic engagement. It's not ideal, but priorities, they have new leadership at the foundation, they have new priorities. We have stayed in conversation with them to ensure that they'll honor the commitment that they made to the current scholars to see them through until the end. And then we've begun reaching out to other partners to see if we can pick up funding for similar programming. The second funder that you see there is Barclays. Barclays came to us specifically through a partnership with our institutional advancement office. So other campus partners, when you're looking at foundation, particularly foundation grants and corporate sponsorships, you're going to want to work with your institutional advancement office and your business and finance office. So at Spelman, our institutional advancement office was in conversation with Barclays, who was interested in funding support for programs specifically connecting college students to younger students in the K-12 system. And our institutional advancement office, because they were familiar with the program that we host in our office called the Girls Leadership Institute, was able to talk to Barclays about that opportunity, what it looked like, how they could get involved. And Barclays was specifically interested in contributing to that event. It's a one-day event where we bring 100 Atlanta Public School students to campus. We engage them with workshops around STEM, and the Spelman students receive training and develop workshops so they can actually be the people who are offering the workshops. So again, you have that two generations. You have the college student and you have the K-12 student interacting, and you have the funder feeling that they're making almost a 2-for-1, right? They're contributing to the college students' experience, but they're also contributing to preparing the next generation of potential college students to have the content information that they need, but also the familiarity with college and a desire to go to college. I have the business and finance office on here because you'll find when you get grants from corporate donors and foundation donors, they're going to want reports, financial reports about how the money is spent, when the money is spent, and you're going to need those partners in business and finance to keep track of those things, to help you pull that information when it's needed, sometimes to help you expedite access to funds. At Spelman, we have a sometimes complicated process from when the donation hits to when we can actually spend it. And so having those relationships in business and finance can help expedite access to the funding so you can spend it on the timeline that the funder is expecting. I want to show a short clip of a specific program that we have called Spell Reads. And this is a program that hits a lot of the, I guess, best practice and lessons learned that we've had around raising external funds. And so I'm going to come out and go over and stop sharing, new sharing. Okay. We know everything
we need to know about how to teach reading. So the fact that we have children who still can't read at 3rd grade, with a lot of them being in low-income Black and Brown communities, is not because there's a lack of knowledge in the field of education about how to teach reading. Often it comes down to a lack of people power. There aren't enough people available to sit with the child one-on-one and give them this type of intense intervention that we're able to offer by leveraging Spelman students to intervene in schools where one-on-one tutoring and literacy can make the difference. Young people have an energy and enthusiasm for approaching issues that maybe the rest of us are a little world weary about, and that even though they are benefited by having support and structure, letting them really bring their individuality and creativity to finding solutions is priceless.
My name is Crystal Noel, and I am a 4th grade teacher here at Pittsburgh Primary. I think it's a really great program. The scholars are invested and they want to go. And it's a time where they can actually just like get a refreshing new face to work with and show what they can do by themselves. The only reason is here to stay. We love them.
That one-on-one, they need that. Because in the classroom, it's hard for them to get one-on-one. Because I have 22 kids, but when they come in here and they get that solid one-on-one and it's all about me, and this person's taking time with me, it makes, I would do it every year. I would recommend this program for anybody. I have 3 kids, so I would recommend it for my grandkids. This program, the way it is designed, would work for any grade level, and not just kids that are academically challenged, but all levels of students, because they meet the students where they are, and they continue to help them to develop and grow.
It encourages our boys and girls to want to go to college, because unfortunately,
So I wanted to show a little piece of that because having a specific program that you're able to talk with your institutional advancement office about, that you need funding for, and you can specifically say what it goes to, and having artifacts like videos or photos to show the program in action are the things that really draw a potential funder in, particularly when you're talking to corporations and foundations. They need something that they're going to be able to, one, understand why it makes a difference, see the level of engagement that is involved, and reasonably believe that they're going to get a return on their investment. And so our Spell Reads program has been a program that brought us to a foundation, a corporate foundation that I hadn't even heard of. The American Family Insurance Foundation got interested in Spell Reads because the vendor that we use for the electronic platform is someone that they have provided seed money to. And they were then interested to know, well, what was Spelman doing with it, since they saw that we used it. And then once we began conversation with them, that initial investment that they made then grew to a little bit larger investment. And so they've been investing now each year for 5 years. They've invested in Spell Reads, and they came for a site visit because they wanted to talk with us more about the program. So really having a specific goal for your funding, a specific program that funders, and also your internal and external stakeholders. When you're talking to your institutional advancement office, they have to have a message they can understand. This money that you want will be used for what? And that helps you with your reporting at the end and helps you maintain the relationship with the potential funder. So we've been lucky enough to have both corporate funding and foundation funding. And they each come with their own pros and cons. Foundation funding for us has tended to be had a little more longevity. Whereas the corporate funding that we've been engaged with the exception of the American Family Insurance, in the instance with Barclays and with Capital One, they've wanted to fund specific events, and it's been sort of year to year to see if they'd want to fund that event again. And so if you have not begun to look at the opportunity to have corporate foundations and corporate donations support your civic engagement program, I encourage you to start those conversations with your institutional advancement office, starting with a specific program or event that you're looking for funding for, so that you can be very clear about what the dollars will be used for and easily able to report back and demonstrate what the return on investment was, getting them excited about giving again for that same event or activity or something else being done by your office after experiencing success. And I think I've come to the end of my time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are going to jump over to Melanie, but keep your questions coming for our colleagues from Spelman, and we will get back to her. Okay, Melanie, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I will share my screen. Okay, am I up?
It looks good. You're good.
Okay. So as Bobby was saying, I appreciate being here. I especially Lena Distilio, who is our Vice Chancellor for Engagement and Community Affairs. She invited me to do this, and it's really a pleasure because it has been a really exciting few years at Pitt, largely under Lena's leadership, as Pitt started a neighborhood commitment strategy that has come to mean a variety of work. So I am in our central fundraising office, and I'm specifically on the team that handles corporate and foundation grants. I'm going to tell you a little bit first about Pitt. Is that the Pitt slide? Sorry, I'm doing two screens and I don't do that very often. So Pitt is one of the oldest universities in the country, founded in 1787. It's an R1 research institution. I think as of last year, with our School of Medicine, especially, it was number 3 in NIH funding. We have 16 schools and colleges. That includes 6 health sciences schools and professional schools like social work and law and liberal arts, arts and sciences. Our main campus is in the city of Pittsburgh, and we also have 4 regional campuses in Western Pennsylvania. We have about 38,000 students, and that includes undergraduates, graduate, and several doctorate programs. We actually have quite a few students from out of state, which is different than I was a Pitt grad years ago, and it was more of an in-state school. So the prominence nationally has really risen over the years. And then in 2020, we were awarded the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification. Again, I would say under Lena Distilio's leadership, a lot of the work has been raised up, but also building on Pitt's long history of community engagement. So the Office of Engagement and Community Affairs that Lena leads is it's directly part of the Chancellor's office, and it encompasses several components. One is the Engaged Campus, which is kind of like a central convening unit for like learning and development and helping to facilitate collaborations. Anchor Institution Initiative, it has to do with how the university handles purchasing and hiring in the neighborhoods that we have commitments in. The neighborhood commitments themselves are in Pitt's own backyard, which is the Oakland neighborhood of Pittsburgh, and then 3 other communities just around the campus, Homewood, Hazelwood, and the Hill District. And those are where we have, in 2 locations, community engagement centers that we call kind of the front door to Pitt in those neighborhoods. So much work happening outside of those buildings, but the facilities are there and represent a lot of Pitt's investment so far. And then the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Pitt It's kind of continuing education for older adults in the community. And as you can see, they have a community impact report that came out just this year. So if I can include some links or share my slides, you're welcome to review that and see a little bit more about what they have pulled together the last few years. So since I am the representative advancement person here today, I thought I would just talk a little bit about what corporate and foundation relations actually is or does. I think people don't always know what advancement means. There's a lot of different aspects of fundraising, like from, crowdfunding to individual donors and alumni relations. But essentially, oh, I just switched, sorry. So we work with faculty and university leadership at all different stages of grant seeking. And we try to do that in coordination with other funding sources they might have, with internal funding. And we can really start anywhere in the process. But generally, we would be helping to identify, what are sort of the grant-friendly fundable needs that are part of a project, looking for funders that might be a good fit because they're all very, very different, and providing some writing and editing assistance when needed. Sometimes that means maybe, someone has a federal proposal that they would like to now try to use as the basis for some foundation support, so we can work to kind of make that transition. We also help after, hopefully they get the grant, and help with things like coordinating publicity and processing the agreements according to many of the funders and the university's policies. And because it is the fundraising aspect of it is the stewardship, really kind of maintaining the relationship. As Jilo said, working on reporting and keeping the funders up to date, having them visit to see certain programs or meet participants is all really important. And I'll show a little bit later, hopefully, a couple of examples of where we were able to build on some past funding to make that happen. So my role specifically, and I did pull out a quote from your article, Dr. Weerts, because this really jumped out at me. I do think there is a lot of parallel between community engagement professionals and fundraising folks like me. I see the role as being one of a connector, definitely helping to create collaborations, especially at such a large institution. There are often people doing very similar work who just have no idea the other kind of programs are going on. So, we try to, a lot of my job is listening, and I do sort of feel like part of what makes it interesting is kind of going between all these different worlds and programs and learning a lot. So we are a small part of our fundraising team. There are 13 of us, and we cover all 16 schools and colleges, a variety of centers and institutes for all of Pitt. In particular, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started to be our team's point person for engagement and community affairs. I also support the School of Education and Social Work, which is kind of like a natural fit, as well as some of our other university centers and institutes. So as I was saying, I think collaboration and coordination are really the heart of my work. And that includes just a variety of all internal partners and external partners. So, specifically, we're responsible for, honoring the donor and the funder's intent, and keeping that institutional relationship going well, but also really quite a few internal departments. As we all know, higher education, there's a lot of different staff and processes and policies involved in something like grant funding. And, there are different staffing models, but I do find that we are quite involved, especially before an application is submitted, to make sure that it's checking all of those boxes. So some of the sort of the trends or considerations that we've seen over the past few years when we are looking at funding for community engagement. And this actually, again, I see a parallel between community engagement and the foundation world. Certainly the corporate world, I think place-based has always been a priority, because often corporations are providing most funding in the areas that they have the most employees. But so, I mean, nationally, foundations like Kresge, who might provide grants all over the country, but also have a strong focus on their hometown, Detroit, or like the Packard Foundation, a lot of support in California, but also nationally. And then in Pittsburgh, we have the same thing. Actually, we have several very large foundations, including the Richard King Mellon Foundation, the Heinz Endowments, and the Henry Hillman Foundation. And each of those, they collaborate amongst themselves, but they also have their own kind of focus areas or neighborhoods even. And so we try to keep that in mind when we're looking at Pitt's neighborhood commitments. So for example, the Richard King Mellon Foundation has invested a lot in the Homewood neighborhood. And so our community engagement center in Homewood, that would be a link that we would try to make versus approaching the Heinz Endowments, which I'll show later has supported our work, our growing work in Hazelwood. I think we're also seeing, and some of if there are CFR colleagues on the meeting, that funders, I think, in the last few years are acknowledging a lot more the inequality in sort of the makeup of foundations and leadership and institutions, looking at how projects and programs do or don't include the communities that they're trying to serve. So, I think at Pitt, the way that engagement in community affairs has developed has had a lot of strong best practices in community engagement. Each of our community engagement centers has a neighborhood advisory council, and that's just one example. So, we've been able to talk about how Pitt is responding to needs that the communities have identified, and that Pitt is working in communities that have invited us to be partners in various endeavors. But we're also seeing that I think there's more acknowledgement that to have really strong impacts, that these things cannot be solved or maybe even addressed, within a year in time for a grant report. So I think there's some change in the expectations, at least that's what I'm seeing, in terms of what kind of an impact can be made. And that's been something that I also feel like we're doing pretty well. It's challenging with 16 schools and colleges, but I think through ECA, we're able to facilitate a lot more interdisciplinary collaboration that's needed to try to make some progress on complex issues. We also, we talk a lot about the university's investment in this. So not just that it's part of the strategic plan. Sorry if I'm going ahead. Not that it's part of the strategic plan, but also the university has actually invested probably close to, I say, over $45 million in renovating and leasing for specific, mostly for the community engagement centers. And so not purchasing, but being part of the economic redevelopment of some of these areas, and supporting probably almost $1 million or more a year in just operating support. So that is really important when we're asking foundations for funding, because they always want to know, well, what's Pitt's skin in the game, basically, and how much of a priority is this? So this has been definitely something that we've talked about more often. And just in general, I feel like collaborations and partnerships, whether it's being mindful of it between the funders, how the university is partnering with community partners. And sometimes I was thinking that means, when we see grant opportunities, it's not uncommon for us to be talking to a community partner and realize it really does make more sense for the community partner to be the grant applicant. It's sometimes it makes sense for the university to be, sometimes not. And we also want to be really mindful of the fact that these community organizations also have their own relationships, especially with our regional foundations. So we're kind of trying to balance a whole network of relationships all of the time. Sorry, this is a little bit of my grants 101, because I was thinking about, as community engagement professionals, if you're kind of thinking about, well, what can working with your corporate and foundation relations office do? Basically, we're trying to sort through, I think, and match up a lot of different puzzle pieces. As I said, like foundations and corporate funders, they all want to know basic things like who's doing the work, who will benefit, why is the approach you're taking the best, or why do you think it's the right approach? What are your goals and objectives? That's all very common for any kind of grant request. But in terms of what they're looking for, that varies widely. So it's, kind of just an ongoing matchmaking game, really. So trying to constantly be listening and learning what we're trying to constantly be listening and learning to what the work is at the university, also listening and learning from the funders what they're looking for, and trying to build partnerships. So, and also I think probably just in the background here is this institutional context. And so I appreciate Jilo mentioning that. It can be really complicated, sometimes difficult. There are, especially if you have, your regional foundations, there's a lot of people probably from your university all wanting to make requests. And it's part of our job to help coordinate that so that hopefully the funder's happy and the university is also successful. So these are just a few of the grants I thought I would talk about that we've had over the last few years. So PNC Foundation, PNC based in Pittsburgh. One of the first grants that they did was in our Hill District Community Engagement Center planning process. And that was to support a group of university advisors to work with community members, which actually started in 2020, and they ended up doing a lot of it on Zoom. But to come up with a plan for how Pitt could enhance and add value to assets and programs that were already there, because we never want to duplicate or push community programs aside. And so now, happily, they're actually also considering a larger grant for a neighborhood education program. Another source of funding, and these were smaller grants over a couple of years, but was from Neighborhood Allies, which is a community development organization that to support digital inclusion programming. So everything from kids, young elementary school kids learning about coding, to seniors in the community learning sort of some basic software skills, or getting some help with phones and tablets and that sort of thing. We also kind of not rebuilt, but maybe restarted a relationship with the Hunt Foundation here in Pittsburgh, which had supported the university, but because of their focus on the Hill District community, they were really interested in seeing what Pitt was going to be doing there, and the focus on youth and kind of career exposure was something that they were really interested in. So the Heinz Endowments, their first grant to this effort was to help evaluate the work of our first community engagement center. And then just most recently, they've made a much larger grant to support planning in the Hazelwood neighborhood for a group of university and community members. This funding from the Shear Foundation was really interesting. This actually turned into a full-time position funded by the university, but it was kind of a pilot at first where a full-time employment counselor was actually going out to the neighborhoods, to our community engagement centers, and really doing a lot of one-on-one work with applicants to try to help increase the number of people in the areas being able to work for Pitt or having some more opportunities. And then this is actually another one that's sort of pending that we're excited about. There's a very large initiative here called the Pittsburgh Study that involves our School of Medicine, social work, education, and if anyone's familiar with this institutional challenge grant, it's part funding for a research practice partnership, which the Pittsburgh Study is, but also to help bring about change at your university that will make it more amenable to that kind of work. So we've had a few successes, and I'm happy to answer questions or share anything else I might have skipped. Thank you for bearing with me in my multiple screens.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I'm excited to come back. I hope that you guys appreciate also the kind of diversity of presenters here. Melanie, it's so nice to have someone who's working inside of corporate and foundation relations to also just talk about like how this happens, right? Like it's one thing to hear about like successes, it's another to be like, how does this happen behind the scenes? So that's always a great sort of coming together. So I'm going to welcome up Rian as our last featured speaker before we move into a conversation with David.
Great, thank you everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've learned a bunch from my colleagues already, so I'm excited to get into that conversation. I've shared in the chat a link to viewing the slides that I'm going to pull up here in a minute, which might be helpful for a table that I'll share at the end, as well as a direct link to my office's website for some additional context. My name is Rian Satterwhite, and I serve as director of the Office of Service Learning and Leadership at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I'm just going to bring up the slides now. Okay, I'm going to trust that that's ready to go. So institutional context, which has already been discussed as being so important. UNLV is a university of 31,000 students. We are an MSI, HSI, and ANAPESI institution, as well as an R1 research. We do hold the Carnegie elective classification in community engagement, and about 80% of our students come from the county that we're situated in, the county of Las Vegas, Clark County. Partly that's a function of our state's population distribution, but it's also a very real reflection of the institution's kind of intimate ties to our local community. About 54% of our students report experiencing at least one basic needs insecurity, which will be relevant because that's a big area of work that my office is increasingly doing. And about 1 in 3 students are the first in their family to attend college, and 50% will be the first to attain a 4-year degree. For some context. So about my office, I was hired in 2017 with a vision in place to create a new office that didn't yet exist. And about a year later, we were able to get that off the ground. Office of Service Learning and Leadership. So we've been around since 2018. Some of our programs far predate that timeline, but much of it has been newly created since that time as well. We describe ourselves as having these 4 different kind of functional areas within one office. We have programming around leadership and democratic engagement, service and community engagement, scholar and student support, and then we also support academic service learning at the institutional level. And I should clarify that we're a unit of student affairs organizationally as well. So I'm here to represent just my office. I can't speak to the broader work that's happening at the institutional level. I'll quickly highlight that within the Division of Student Affairs, we have a unit called the Center for Academic Excellence and Outreach, and they have one of the largest TRIO and Gear Up and early access programs in the country. And our new Vice President of Student Affairs came up through that office, and so has a very rich set of experiences and expertise around grant writing and whatnot. And when he came into the vice presidency role, really expressed a strong expectation for the rest of student affairs to develop these skill sets as well. And that's been a driver for us. So when I came on board, we had a very generously endowed scholars program called the Engelstad Scholars Initiative. That just note that that program is very much alive and well, but it's no longer under our administration. It was moved to an academic college last spring. But that was the context in which I came into this position, stewarding an existing strong endowed program. But some of the work that we've done in recent years, and you can see this a little bit by looking at some of the timelines associated, is we really only got serious about doing additional grant writing about 3 years ago. And so this has been a steep and wonderful learning curve for us. And I'm really thankful that we've had some strong successes along the way. One of our current scholar programs is called the UNLV Hope Scholars Initiative, and that is for students experiencing housing insecurity on campus. We have a funding partnership with our local United Way, which has been really helpful for the last 3 years. We've got a significant in-kind gift from a nearby student-oriented housing complex that provides us free beds to place students in year-round, which is incredibly helpful. And then we have a range of private donors and other community organizations that have been engaged with us for quite some time. Fostering Scholars is a new program. It's about 2 years old now and was created with the generous support from the Walter S. Johnson Foundation. They have thankfully continued to fund us in a second cycle now. So they have provided more than $500,000 to support this initiative for former foster youth at the institution. And we have several additional relationships with organizations I foster and some private donors who have really committed in a strong way to launching this program successfully and embedding it institutionally. I mentioned student basic needs is when I was covering the UNLV institutional profile. That's very relevant for much of our student population here. And we were successful in securing a US Department of Education grant that began funding just last month. So we're at the early stages of a 3-year grant cycle there that is nearly $1 million coming in to help us really significantly expand our initiatives supporting student basic needs all across campus. And then as of Friday, I'm happy to report a brand new corporate gift coming from Jilo, which is the Center for Expanding Leadership and Opportunity, a new nonprofit on the scene that we've built a relationship with. And they have funding that they're funneling through from the Allstate Foundation that's going to help us expand our community engagement and student volunteerism initiatives on campus for this year. So with the timing here, I just wanted to provide a high-level kind of complete overview of the various funding initiatives, some corporate, some not, at my office, and I'm happy to see where the conversation goes from there.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Brian. I'm going to bring everybody back who just presented along with David to engage in some conversation. David, I don't think I can elevate you as a spotlight yet because you have to turn your video back on, I think.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't.
Okay.
I
Okay, let
can't
me-
spotlight you yet until your video is on.
Okay, here we go. Start video. Excellent.
There we
Okay.
are.
All
Okay,
right.
there you go.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all. That was really insightful, and really appreciate all these perspectives. And like Bobby said, what's really great is to see the diversity of approaches and institutions and people on the call, and to really get a chance to dive in on these questions. I had a few in mind, but I do want to offer the opportunity, as Bobby mentioned, for everybody to offer some questions through the chat that we can engage in conversation around this. One of the things, as I was taking notes, that I had thought about, that I wanted to throw out to all of the panelists, is when I think about the portfolio of donors that you have around this. So you have individual donors, alums, foundation, corporate. Could you just explain, I think for the group who have maybe been on some of the other calls as well, or the Zoom events where they're talking about individual donors, could you say a little bit about maybe some key differences in engaging individual donors versus corporate foundation, especially as it might relate to questions around program support versus infrastructure, and what these various groups are even kind of on their radar for doing? So I'd just be curious if you could talk to the group a little bit about that as they think about different segments of donors who might support their work. So I wanted to throw that out there as a kickoff question. So anybody want to jump in on that as you think about that on your own campuses?
I'll take a first shot. I do tend to think of the different types of donors, in terms of the kinds of funding and kinds of support they provide. So specifically, endowments are not typically something foundations or corporations provide. That's not to say never, but like you said, foundations, every funder has sort of a different goals in mind, and foundations have typically, on the advantages, want to support new projects and help innovation, but also, don't want to fund things in perpetuity like an endowment does, or even providing general operating support. So I do think that's changing a bit, hopefully for nonprofits. But I also always say it's different for universities. Yeah, I think it is more program project related, but in every case, it depends on the funder, because I really feel like every corporation and foundation is as different as every individual.
Really great point. Thank you. Go ahead. Yes.
I think in my experience at Spelman, we have also seen that our corporate donors are a little more focused on a specific program, a specific, this is a fiscal year contribution and they want to see it extended in that time and they want to see the results from it. They haven't been open to like supporting staff for something. They want to support something that they feel like is already happening, and they can sort of maybe build the capacity of it to happen a little bigger or a little more frequently. We have had some success with foundation funders being willing, like you said, to start something new, to fund a pilot of something, maybe to put a little support toward a staff person. Often on the foundation side, they don't want to be the sole donor. They want to know what other, what skin does the institution have in the game, even if that skin is percentage of staff person's time. They want that to be quantified so it can be reported on in the end.
Great, thank you. Ryan, anything to thoughts on that?
I definitely echo my two colleagues here, and I think both of whom have more experience with the corporate funding world than I do, as I'm just starting to get into that space. But I've certainly seen both from foundations and the corporate funders that interest in needing to be very, very clear about what we're able to bring to the table. Sometimes that's actual institutional support and dollars, and sometimes that is just having additional partners in the mix, so that they aren't feeling that they're solely responsible for a given initiative.
That's interesting. One thing that stood out as you're all talking about this, and I think one of you used the term the skin in the game of your own institution. I remember hearing one president of a foundation said, before I go out to raise money, we have to be our own largest donor in the sense that we have to put our own and demonstrate that we're committed to this. And talking about their own gift solicitation as helping advance what they called the margin of excellence. It's to say, like, how do you bring us toward the next level, or trying these new pilots? I had another question, and again, do we have, I'm going to go on here before I go on. Penny asks, okay, I'm looking here. Here's a question. What reports do you send out to donors and funders? And are they monthly, quarterly, or less? You want to weigh in on that for the group?
I would say that the funder kind of sets the expectation. Different funders want different things at a different cadence. We've had some that want a quarterly report, and sometimes for us, because like we had one that wanted a report in October and then another one in January. Not much had happened between October and January, but we complete the report, providing what we can in terms of update. But for us, the funder really sets when they want to see those and what they want them to include. I will say a lesson that I've learned is, even if you have a really gracious funder who doesn't set clear expectations for a report, you want to provide a report, because that's what allows them to continue the conversation within their organization that can lead to continued funding or additional funding. So even in those instances, you want to make sure that you're at least giving them back when did it happen, what happened, how many people participated, and some pictures that they can show, because they want something they can show people about what happened with that money.
Great. Any other? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, like that's definitely stewardship 101. That you can't, it never hurts to say thank you, and to send some information along, even if they weren't specifically asking for it. You know, part of, I think, the good thing about working with folks on proposals is then I can also help with reporting and communicating what the project has done or not been able to do to the funder.
Yeah, we have 4 active grants that I'm managing right now. Some are quarterly reports, some are annual. We certainly we treat those as minimum expectations and try and engage the organizations as often as possible. And sometimes there's an opportunity to get a little creative about that. For instance, one of our foundation funding partners is going to be hosting its board meeting on campus, and we're helping to facilitate that in about a month's time. And so that's an opportunity to help them out, but also to build some new relationships above and beyond kind of the reporting aspect.
Can I jump in, David, with a follow-up question to that?
Yes,
I'm
of course.
just be curious, particularly for Ryan and Jilo, if you guys has this, and you kind of talked about this at Spelman, but has doing this work led to a closer relationship around communications? Like, is it led, because if you're thinking about these reports and thinking about how do you develop these assets that can tell the story, has getting more involved in this work helped kind of reshape how you are prioritizing or working with communications and marketing colleagues? And maybe not. I'm just curious if there's been some linkages there for you.
More, it has increased engagement with our institutional advancement office. Those have been our closest partners. Melanie understates their value when she talks about the work that they do and the knowledge that they have about how to navigate these things with potential funders. And our business and finance office. Communications, yes, we recently experienced a major turnover in staff and communications, so that's kind of set us back a little bit in terms of what they have the capacity to do. They have been helpful in providing advice, but things like the video clip that I showed you, they were able to recommend someone who could do it, but they didn't have the capacity in-house to do that for us. So we do try to keep them informed about what's happening, and they will lift up the work sometime, but unfortunately for us, it hasn't played out that way.
It definitely has for us in probably two ways. One, in terms of direct relationships with institutional communications folks, but also internally, we've invested more by creating some additional student kind of marketing and communications positions who are tasked with effectively capturing some of the student experiences in different programs and creating some collateral around that. So some of it has come at the institutional level, but some of it has been kind of an internal commitment as well.
Another question that came in from Jennifer is, do you have strategies to fund infrastructure, either creatively writing this into a grant that needs to fund a program or finding sources that would be more amenable to fund infrastructure?
Talk about that a little bit. So the grants that I highlighted were largely for the work of our engagement and community affairs office, to build our infrastructure, to build partnerships in the communities. But there are also a lot of grants, and this is where my role is to also communicate with my colleagues who do corporate and foundation relations for medicine, for nursing, for law, for engineering, because they might have a grant proposal that they want to include community partners in or want to do work in the community. And so we have written, as you said, someone wrote creatively, but legitimately, the work of engagement and community affairs into those sort of more program or discipline-based grants. So, for example, some of the percent of the time of our community engagement center directors for facilitating partnerships, maybe of some evaluation funding to go along with the program funding, and we do consider those direct costs. We're very careful to talk about what's indirect costs. Universities, that's sort of a whole can of worms. But these costs that we're putting in, sometimes not all, but to some proposals are direct costs. That's how we try to work it in a little bit. I hope that answers the question partly.
And another question that jumped out at me that I would suspect this group hopefully might be interested in is this notion. I think, Melanie, you said that acknowledging that the community partner might be the grant applicant and that they have their own relationship with the funder. Could you say a little bit around how to manage that with faculty and others who they're trying to sort that and say, of course, we can manage your money, trust us, right? And so there's all of these questions of how to work out a relationship with that, especially I think in the case of faculty who might be working in the area where it might relate to their own research and promotion intent. There's a lot of issues. Could you also say maybe a word about that? Because I think it's a really fascinating and important issue, but
Sure.
I'd love to hear more about that.
So I'm trying to think of an example. So I think it's case by case. Everything's case by case. But it does come back to where we've been able to navigate it successfully is where the faculty member had a longstanding good partnership with the community organization. And so we talk about the grant opportunity like we're one team, like what's going to make, the most sense, what's going to be more successful, where's most of the work happening, that sort of thing. It's definitely been something was new to me in having engagement in community affairs be part of my work, because I only had to think before about the university and the funder. But the community partner. So for example, if we see, I'm just really pulling out an example, like say the R.K. Mellon Foundation puts out a request for proposals, and we have to be aware, and this is where there's a lot of communication, a lot of meeting, and just keeping in touch regularly with our ECA team. If they learn through a community partner that they are applying for that request for proposals, we need to be aware of that and see if we can partner, add value, not sort of be the 1,000-pound elephant in the room. And we don't, like I said, we don't want to duplicate, we don't want to step on efforts. It's just every single one is different. I don't know if that answers your question.
So it's a lot of communication discussion. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Jilo?
Yeah, a lot of communication. I sit on several community collaboratives where we're in conversations with, sometimes convened by United Way or convened by a community foundation, who, of course, we're all looking at as could be potential funding, but also they're convening organizations who are doing similar work. So we might be in the room with some of our partners that we're doing work with. And I find less conflict recently because a lot of funders are asking for collaborative proposals where you would have like a lead, an anchor institution, but then you also have some other partners that are committed to the work and clear roles defined for everybody. And so that's our preferred approach. We write letters of recommendation when our partners are pursuing grants. We do ask them sometimes to write for us. And so those relationships are important, just like when you're a student applying to college and you need those recommendations, your partner relationships matter. When you're applying for funding, you're going to need them to write in support of your grant. So not often in competition with our funders, usually supportive or collaborating with them, with our partners when we're looking for funding.
And maybe the last question we asked before we transition into kind of wrap up is the question came up again from Penny, is around, seems to me you're all great at connecting the various silos within your schools. Have you experienced any pushback from that?
The short answer is yes. Everybody's busy. Everybody has a lot on their plate. So when you approach them with something, that maybe they don't see as their work, there can be a little bit of pushback. But I've learned to lead with what's in this for you, to get people into the room. And then people often find reward in being in the room, and that it really does help them to better understand what their colleagues are doing, ultimately helps them with their work. So you get a little pushback. Everybody's not excited to work collaboratively. It's like that group project in school. Sometimes it makes it harder, sometimes it makes it slower, but the value at the end is definitely worth it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ryan.
I think I would say yes as well, but maybe the aspect that's been the steepest learning curve for me has just not so much dealing with the pushback, but building trust within the institution. So my office was a new structure. No one knew us. We certainly didn't have a track record of successfully bringing in dollars. And it was quite frankly hard at times early on to kind of get the attention and active support of our foundation officers or whatnot, our communications officers, because they're all under their own expectations and deadlines, trying to bring in and hit their targets and bring in money for the institution, and we didn't have a proven track record. And so it took a lot of effort early on to just do a lot of it internally and to land a few wins before we kind of got on the radar. And a big part of that was relationship building as well. So now I, as a new director, actually knew who to go to and who I needed to call and coordinate with. But that was a steeper hill to climb than I maybe had originally expected.
Good. And maybe at this point, since we just have about 15 to 20 minutes or so, I'm going to transition to kind of a wrap up of the series. And Bobby, is there anything you want to throw in around that? Go ahead.
No, I'm actually going to remove the spotlight so we're all here in case anybody wants to kind of jump in. No pressure on taking off video, but as we kind of just, I think, transition to more of a discussion for folks that want to be engaged. And I appreciate folks who are willing to stick with us on this. The only thing I'm bringing to this is that we want to think at Campus Compact about what can we do that really adds value to members and how can we support institutions and community and civic engagement leaders in this space. We have had a lot of interest in this overall topic throughout the past 6-9 months, and I think it reinforces there's a lot of needs, but there's also a lot of hunger for this overall work. So we just wanted to spend really the next 15 minutes trying to uncover a little bit from those that are willing to kind of jump in and share. What might the future look like? Where might we support you? What are things that have come up? And I think David has some questions to kick us off in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's mostly around what are the unmet needs at this point as you continue on your advancement journey with this. I see several different questions that people have around stewardship and engaging with your advancement officers. But what might be something, if it's communities of practice, other workshop type of things, or content areas that people need more guidance on? So that's one question, and then I have a couple of wrap-up ones too. So.
I know you all have heard from me a lot today already, but I will just say that I really appreciated the format of these, that a lot of times I'll see like a community of practice opportunity that's of interest to me, but I can't always commit multiple, that I'm going to attend multiple sessions, that I'm going to do that deep in between work. So I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with my peers on these topics in this sort of 1 hour, 1.5 hour format to engage the topic and get the information, but not feel like I might be overcommitting myself. So thank you for that.
Great. Maybe another way to ask the question too is, for those of you, especially who might have attended the whole series, what's something that you might do differently now moving forward that before you attended the series that you wouldn't have thought to do, or you would have done it differently? Is there something that was a particular nugget that you take away from the series, or maybe you just attended 1 or 2 of them, but would love to hear from people around that, even if you want to use the chat or kind of live talk around this. So any thoughts that people have? I'm trained to sit a very long time on this and to have awkward silence as a faculty member of many years. So,
Oh, that's interesting. I appreciated Penny's comments. Who is actually a funder and not on the university side. So I think that raises up, um, you know, the question of kind of how we elevate certain kind of perspectives into these conversations. You know, Melanie was an example of that today. I would wonder about what does it look like to, think about bringing folks who may be folks who can uncover and kind of share like some of the work that happens behind the scenes, meshed with kind of best practices and people who are doing the work every day.
I think a couple of last things, if I might share, of what I take away from this is when I look at the series. One of the things I wanted to emphasize with the kickoff of those months ago, back in March, was around how the work that's being done around civic engagement, that you are a tremendous asset, not only to your centers and programs, but to the university. I think what we saw in all three cases today is that civic or public engagement, community engagement is deeply embedded in the story of all three institutions, but in slightly different ways. So I think part of the takeaway for me is, how do you embed this work that you're doing as part of kind of the critical, what one scholar calls the saga of your institution, of like, what is your deeply held values and how you express this through this work, and to get donors, in this case, foundation, corporate relations, others, invested in this way of thinking. So that was one thing. Another thing from the second program, it was around donor-centered professorships, some of the internships. There was talking about the internal dynamics of how to do this well, how you build good relationships with advancement, how you work with other programs that are not funded in a way that's not competing with others, even the idea of for centers that are well funded, how it means for you to leverage additional support. Another set of questions related to external consideration. So how we think about the values that we hold and match that with donor interests. One of the folks on the previous webinars talked about making sure that the fundraising tail doesn't wag the program dog, in the sense that you can, if you have a shiny opportunity to raise money around something that might not be the best option. I remember one of my former bosses, when I was at Wisconsin, I was doing major gifts for the Wisconsin Law School. We had the big building campaign, and this dean of the law school said, "Boy, I think we could raise a lot more money for the law school if we put a basketball hoop on each side of it." And that was a reference to a $50 million gift that was just given to our new basketball stadium, the Kohl Center in Wisconsin. But that probably wouldn't fit into the law interests. But it's to say that, how do we think about keeping to what our programs are and connecting to those as the real, the work that we're doing. Some of the other takeaways from the series for me is around how this might relate to earmarks for engagement. Some of the previous sessions were around that, or the last session over the summer, of how you work across teams of government affairs, special projects officers, and how members of Congress love to hear that their colleges are engaging communities, and that this can be a real win in your regions. So you might think about this in terms of the portfolio of resource providers, of where this fits into the corporate foundation work, as well as individual donors, alumni, and others. So those were some of the takeaways of how all of these can be pulled together in a way for sustainability, not only of your centers, but really around as a competitive strategy for your own university. So to see yourselves in that broader light. So those are a couple of takeaways that I had. And anything that kind of still fuzzy for people or for further conversation as we wrap up in the last few minutes?
And I think, David, one of the things that I will say also that I've heard from folks is that this can be a pretty intimidating space. That the fundraising space, if you haven't engaged with it, can feel pretty intimidating of like, I'm not really sure what I don't know, and I don't even know where to start. And I've heard that from folks across the country. And I think it does remind us of trying to create more accessible pathways into this work. I think that's some of what we've been able to accomplish here, kind of pulling back the curtain and saying, this is where folks who come at this from all different spaces and connection points on campus are able to find a way forward. I will say, I think for those that are on this call, along with, we'll share it with anybody who's participated. There's been a couple hundred people who have participated in various sessions over the series, because I think to your point, like this has not been something that we've required you to come to all of them. They've been very one-off. Like if this is a topic of interest to show up, I think we can maybe send out a feedback form to everyone. And David, we can think about some of those kind of questions you raised to say, what kind of feedback do people have? Because I think we want to figure out, and we could keep doing stuff like this. We could keep offering kind of one-off webinar kind of formats like this, and maybe that is a really strong direction. But we also just wanted to note that we can also think about kind of more deeper support areas if there's of interest for it, and what that might look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to respond to one of the comments here, Penny, around some of the sensitivities about being taken for granted in various ways. And I'd be curious if the panel has anything to say about that, where you can kind of, I remember there was always concern when I was fundraising that there was kind of bait and switch kind of going on and bring people to campus on things. So if you all have thoughts about that in terms of how you advocate for your own work in a way that's collaborative, but it's knowing it's a negotiation with the donors and the foundations around what is needed. Any thoughts from the panel about this?
I do feel like sometimes it feels like it's just an ongoing process of education. Because like you said, this fundraising can sort of be like a mysterious endeavor. And maybe also, whether it's individual fundraising or grants. So sometimes just literally like explaining that our role exists is important, and trying to show, I think there can be a perception, especially like for us, that we are that this role is kind of gatekeeping. So meaning like it's, there's a lot of competing interests that all want funding from a lot of the same foundations, and I really don't think of it as we never want to try to keep anyone from funding, but it is really important to keep in mind that you're doing the work as part of a much larger institution. And so we try to coordinate, and it can hopefully add some value to the process and make proposals more successful. But sometimes it can feel like folks would rather just maybe go their own way.
Yeah, others on that?
So I think when I started doing this work and working with institutional advancement around this type of fundraising, I was much more willing to agree to whatever it was that the funder wanted, right? If the funder wanted a program doing X, Y, and Z, we can do that, right? And what I've learned is we can do that, but everyone is happier if we stick to our part, the part of the mission that we're supposed to be working on, right? If we give that feedback to the funder to say, well, that's not exactly the kind of work that my office does, we could approach that issue in this way. And more often than not, funders are interested in what we do. They didn't know that was what we did, or they didn't know that was how we did it. So I've come to understand it as much more of a conversation rather than being so quick to agree to whatever is put out there, because in the long run, everybody's better off if I bring my expertise into the room. Like, I know some things about this work and I can bring that into the conversation with a funder. There's value in that.
Yeah, I'll just add that as someone newer to this work, it took me some time to adjust to just the numbers involved, right? The amount of money that we're talking about. And I think it was easy early on to kind of get a little starstruck by that and be inclined, as Jilo was saying, to just say yes, right, to any opportunity that came by. But I think that the quicker you can transition into a place of partnership and reciprocity, the better, and recognizing the expertise that each of us can bring to the table and our familiarity with the student populations that we're serving, and the better off everyone is going to be.
Well, I think we hit all. Oh, go ahead. Somebody. I think I heard.
It was just me. It was just me saying thank you to everyone, I think, as we wrap up. But go ahead, Dave.
Yes, I was just going to add mine. Thanks as well. We really appreciate our panelists and really insightful, and we have this recorded for future reference. Appreciate your time and really helpful perspectives and insights on these particular topics, and all of you for your attendance and participation today. So grateful for that, and stay tuned for continuing thought about this as we can serve around the needs of this particular very important area that is of concern to all of us around fundraising and sustainability of this work. So for that, you have 3 minutes. It is yours in this left here recording mine. So thank you again, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.